There are two key issues that shape everything, including the election. One is, are we going to destroy organized human life on Earth? There are two ways in which we are now racing to do that. One is the increasing threat of nuclear war, both in Europe and in Asia. The second is by heating the globe to the point where much of it will be unlivable. We just heard a couple of weeks ago from the IPCC, the International Scientific Monitors, their most dire report, cutting few corners about where we now stand, overwhelming scientific consensus. If anything's solid, that is, they say we have to radically cut the use of fossil fuels, beginning now, aiming for termination a couple of decades from now. If not, we pass irreversible tipping points where there'll be a steady decline to essentially destruction of organized human life on Earth. The other possibility is we do it quickly with a nuclear war. Well, going back to the 2024 election, as in every other major decision in our lives, these are the top issues of concern. There are other issues. Will American democracy survive in any form? Rather serious question. It's not a joke. Other democracies are in deep trouble. Read the newspaper this morning. In India, the head of the opposition party, Rahul Gandhi, was just tossed into jail, part of Prime Minister Modi's effort to dismantle India's democracy and install a racist Hindu ethnocracy in its place. It's one case. Talk about others. The United States is plainly the most important because of its extraordinary power and influence in the world. So that's at stake. And we can continue. There are lots of other things. So I think we could have said for each of the recent elections that it's the most important, yet that was correct. It'll be also true of the next one. The Republican organization is not a political party in the traditional sense. It has been turning into something quite different for several decades, in fact. I agree with the comments of the political analysts of the American Enterprise Institute, Thomas Mann, Norman Ornstein, that the Republicans have become what they call a radical insurgency that has abandoned the procedures of normal parliamentary politics. If you rank it look at international rankings, its attitudes and commitments, it ranks alongside the far-right parties in Europe with neo-fascist origins. The party is now the popular base of the party is pretty much in the pocket of Donald Trump. You look at polls, overwhelmingly popular. That's the end result of a long period. You can trace it back to Richard Nixon, in which the party recognized at that time, it was an authentic political party. The Republicans and the Democrats, whatever you thought about them, they pretty much overlapped in modes of procedure, attitudes, and so on. The Republicans were the more pro-business of the two business parties in the United States. The United States is basically a one-party state. The business party has two factions called Democrats and Republicans. The Republicans were the more dedicated pro-business party. Richard Nixon, intelligence strategist, understood that the Republicans cannot win elections on their actual programs. Their programs of strong support for the business world, for the ownership class, for investors, for banks, and so on. You can't get votes that way. So he recognized that what the Republicans ought to do is to shift attention away from their social economic policies to something else, what are now called cultural issues. With Nixon, it was what was called the Southern strategy. Let's draw Southern Democrats to the Republican Party by barely concealed racism. By the mid-1970s, Republican strategists, Paul Weiser in particular, recognized that if the Republicans pretended, I stress, pretend to be opposed to abortion, they could pull in the huge evangelical vote, then being politicized for the first time, and the Northern Catholic vote. So they all switched on a dime. George H.W. Bush, Ronald Reagan had been strongly what's now called pro-choice, suddenly became what's now called pro-life, almost instantly. Other leaders too. So that became a plank of the Republican Party. Later on, love of guns. Later on, something else. Anything to keep people's attention away from the socioeconomic policies, which are very harmful for their own constituency. So you have to shift it. With Newt Gingrich, when he took over the House, this became almost an open war. He said we have to declare war on the Democrats. And since then, it's been steady decline in this direction. Became Donald Trump, who's a very good showman, was able to mobilize these ideas, these tendencies very successfully. So you look at his legislative program, one achievement, a major tax cut for the rich and the corporate sector, stabbing everyone else in the back. But you don't talk about that. What you talk about is the great replacement, Democrats being sadistic pedophiles, anything else. Just, it's kind of don't look behind the curtain, you know. It's, and that's been, you can understand the success. There has been a period of 45 years of what amounts to savage class war against the general population. It's bipartisan, led by Republicans, started with Ronald Reagan, followed by Bill Clinton, Obama, and it's called neoliberalism, but which has a technical definition. The definition of neoliberalism, you look it up in the dictionary, it says something about free markets, free enterprise. That's not what it is. It's basically class war. So yes, there is deregulation that gives free enterprise, but there's a footnote. Deregulation leads to financial crashes very quickly, in fact. Started right away in the Reagan administration. Continental Illinois bailout, homing, savings and home crisis. The business world understands that the way it works is get deregulation, we move towards monopolization quite naturally. We make risky investments, make a ton of money. When it all crashes, the state comes in and the friendly taxpayer bails us out. We're seeing it right now, in fact, but it happens over and over. So it's a market bailout economy for the very rich, and many other things cooperated. So Reagan and also Thatcher, his associate in this, their first acts were to attack labor movement and undermine it severely. that made good sense. The labor movement is the main way in which people can defend themselves in a vicious class war. So you have to eliminate the defenses. They used illegal means, but it didn't matter. This opened the door to the corporate sector to move in with massive efforts at strike breaking, undermining labor laws, much of it illegal. But when you control the criminal state, it doesn't matter if what you're doing is illegal. And many other things like this. I'll go through the details. Like, for example, real wages for male workers are basically 1979. Productivity's increased, goes to very few hands. We even have measures of it. The Rand Corporation, super respectable, did a study of what they call politely the transfer of wealth from the working class and the middle class, lower 90% of the population, transfer of wealth from them to the top 1%. Their estimate over the 40 years of class war, they don't call it that, is about $50 trillion. That's quite impressive class war, to steal $50 trillion from the working class and the middle class. And in order to get away with it, you have to shift attention away from the policies and go to cultural issues. Well, one of the effects of the class war has been to shatter the social order. People live with precarious existences, very little wealth. If you're Afro-American, virtually no wealth, precarious jobs. Maybe you'll be called tomorrow, maybe you won't. Associations dissolved. People are alone, atomized, angry, properly angry, resentful, rightly resentful, distrust institutions, rightly. Institutions don't work for them. Very fertile terrain for demagogues. You get an accomplished megalomaniac narcissist like Donald Trump, who's a good showman. He can mobilize people on this basis. And from their point of view, it's understandable. The Republican organization now relies pretty heavily on a rural vote. Take a walk through a rural town, see what it looks like. Where's the industry? It's gone. Clinton insisted on global trade policies, which were designed to harm the American working class and to benefit rich entrepreneurs and investors. It's called NAFTA, World Trade Organization. It's not free market, it's highly protectionist. It's one reason why drugs are out of sight in the United States, because of the highly protectionist elements of the investor rights agreement called free trade agreements are in our propaganda system. So the industry's gone, stores are shuttered, homes are shuttered, young people are leaving, there's nothing there. Desperation. In fact, there's even an increase in mortality among the white working class. Increase in mortality, unheard of in societies outside of war and pestilence. It's happening here. Economists call it deaths of despair. Well, you grab onto something. Maybe it'll be the church. Maybe it'll be the great replacement. The Democrats are bringing in immigrants to undermine the white race. Almost half of Republicans believe that the Democratic Party is run by sadistic pedophiles who are trying to groom children, one after another. Crazy belief. And you can understand it. When your life is being taken away, you grab onto something. Well, it used to be things like, say, in the 1930s when I was growing up, you grabbed onto the labor unions, which were then growing, developing. It's my own family, first generation working class. Things were pretty harsh, much worse than today, objectively, but it was a hopeful period. I remember it very well. we're going to get together, we're going to get out of this together, we'll work together. There was a moderately sympathetic administration. Labor unions were not just wages, they were cultural institutions, classes, adult education, meetings, discussions, concerts, even a week in the park in the Pocono Mountains for my Catskill Mountains for my aunts who were unemployed seamstresses. It was a whole way of life. Go on. Reagan was a vicious, brutal killer and racist, understood, or at least his advisors understood, we got to wipe this out. And that's been the same pretty since. Clinton joined in his own way. Well, that's where we are now. We have an election coming up with one party, which is, for quite rational reasons, dedicated to undermining of democracy. They can't survive in a democratic system. You can't have a party whose sole commitment in policy is to enrich the very rich and the corporate sector and stab everyone else in the back. Can't run on those programs. So let's undermine democracy. Let's bring up issues like democratic pedophiles, the great replacement, whatever crazy idea comes along next, but just turn people's attention to that. And again, given the collapse, the attack on the social order, this is not too hard to do. That's one party. The other party is split. The Democratic Party, which still functions as a political party, is pretty much split between a Clintonite party management, which is part of the general assault with a slightly softer touch, and the sort of Sanders movement, which has a strong popular base, not much of a representation in Congress. And they are, in the American system, doctrinal system, they're called radical. In fact, by international standards, they're mildly centrist. In fact, one of the editors of the London Financial Times, the major business journal, by no means a radical journal, one of them quipped half-jokingly, only half-jokingly, that if Bernie Sanders was in Germany, he could be running for the conservative Christian Democrat Party. If you look at it, it's not false. Take a look at his programs: universal health care, free higher education, child care. You have that everywhere. You have it in Germany, Mexico, France, take up Brazil, look around the world. So these are mildly social democratic policies. The United States, considered very radical. The United States has a very class-conscious business class. This goes way back. That's why we have a very violent labor history, extremely violent, surprised conservative Europeans. But